Kia ora and welcome to our webinar this morning. I'm delighted to introduce Mariana Brussoni and Susan Herrington to join us for this conversation about outdoor spaces in early childhood. Mariana Brussoni is a developmental psychologist and associate professor at the Department of Pediatrics and School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. She investigates things like child injury prevention and outdoor risky play, and she focuses on parents and caregivers' perceptions of risks and also the design of outdoor environments. Susan Herrington is a professor and chair of the Landscape Architecture Programme at the University of British Columbia. And she's led a really interesting 5-year multidisciplinary study into outdoor play spaces at childcare centres in Vancouver and developed a set of guidelines which have been used throughout the world to design outdoor play spaces. So it's really great to have these two people with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Mariana and Susan.
Thank you.
My pleasure to be here.
Okay, we're going to start with a few questions. Let's start with a question about outdoor play. Why should we promote outdoor play and what are the benefits in terms of outcomes for children? Mariana, perhaps you'd like to start.
Sure, yeah, it's something we've been doing a lot of work on lately, but I think if we put the research aside, that it's actually quite intuitive for people if they think back, to their own favorite childhood play memory. And Susan and I have done research where we actually asked people exactly this. And by and large, what people say is that they were outdoors, that they were unsupervised with friends, playing in, ditches, ravines, forests, the streets around their house, not formal play spaces. And when they're asked what they loved about that experience, it was a sense of freedom and fun and being able to do whatever they wanted to do and hang out with their friends and kind of limitless time and moving their bodies and shouting and all of that. And actually you can map all of those kinds of tasks onto really important developmental factors. And so even putting aside the research, we can intuitively understand, and then we can link it to children's needs and developmental tasks. And it actually, it's a beautiful marriage.
Interesting. And so also there are specific or particular kinds of outdoor play that can be particularly important. And one of these is about play in nature. It's something that we're talking and thinking about a lot in New Zealand. So what is nature play and why is that important? Susan, can I turn to you for this question?
Yeah, certainly. So nature play is when you have natural elements, plants, rocks, water, sand, that are part of the play environment. They're integrated into play and into the play space. They're not fenced off. They're not foundation plantings, which you often see in residential places, or the plants are hiding the foundation for some strange reason, but they are part of the play intentionally for the kids to use. And it's really important now with COVID-19, people are realizing how much they need to play out in nature and with nature. We know that it reduces stress. Mariana and I did a risky play meets nature play intervention project where we found a decreased depressed effect for kids who are exposed to nature plants that we had brought in to the playscape, as well as risky play. It also helps develop mental curiosity because the child sees something grow or change over time. It taps into their curiosity. Why is it doing that? And that really starts, to form the basis of things like scientific thinking is curiosity. There's also, I've noticed in my decades of doing this, this moral development that has happened. Because I've noticed when I intervene with plant material in particular to a site, all of a sudden you start attracting all these moths and butterflies and little, insects, spiders. And in every instance, the children decide whether that creature will live or die. And so they are having, they might be like 3 years old, but they're having this moral discussion about life that had that creature not come into their lives, they wouldn't have had that discussion. And it's also just really good for physical fitness. We know that you burn more calories when you go outside. You sleep better when you go outside. There's a whole practice of putting children outside in Europe while they take their naps. And we also know that children are more cooperative when they play in nature. And then I did one of my first studies was on the infant garden, and I designed an infant garden for children about 14 months old. And we found that the addition of plants increased the sensory motor development of the children, both fine and gross. So there are tons of reasons why we should have kids play in nature.
Yes, and it's very a very holistic and broad range of outcomes there, which is again, part of our practice here in New Zealand in early childhood education is to look for that holistic development. So sounds like it taps right into that. Thank you. And what about risky play? This is again something that we're quite keen on in New Zealand. Why is that important, Mariana?
So just for those who aren't familiar with risky play, it's defined as exciting or thrilling play where children are engaging with uncertainty and there's a chance of physical injury. And if you think about each of those elements of that definition, they're all important. So the thrilling and exciting part is really, the child feeling like they're pushing themselves, trying out an experiment with the world, with their body. They don't know how it's going to turn out, and that's part of the uncertainty side of things. And they're moving their body and they're doing experiments. So of course there's a chance of physical injury, just as there is whenever you move your body. And what risky play looks like is actually very different for different kids based on their interests, their capabilities, etc. So it's not necessarily up to us as adults to decide, well, 3-year-olds should play like this, and that's what risky play looks like. It's up to us more than anything to provide the environment and the freedom for kids to be able to play like that and make decisions for themselves. And there's 8 different kinds of risky play that have been outlined in the literature. So play at speed, play at height, play with dangerous tools like hammers or nails, play with near dangerous elements like fire or water, play rough and tumble play, play where there's a chance of getting lost, so the child can be away from supervision or, in a place where they feel like they're, in a hidey hole. And then 2 more that have been found, and this is all based on research by Ellen Sandseter in Norway at Queen Maud University. More recent research with younger kids, which found play with impact, so just kind of striking things, and vicarious risky play, so young children watching other kids engage in risky play. And our own research with Susan and with other collaborators, we did a systematic review looking across the literature. And what we found was a strong association with physical activity. So kids who were allowed to do this kind of play were more physically active, less sedentary, and also an association with social behavior. And that more than anything was because kids were able to kind of negotiate those relationships with each other themselves, be able to kind of, if they can wander the neighborhood on their own, they can be with friends more and so on. And other research that we've done is also indicating the importance of this kind of play for risk management, right? So, kids need to be able to take risks to understand how to manage those risks and take those lessons into other parts of life so that they can keep themselves safe. So a myriad of benefits, really.
Yeah, again, a really holistic range, isn't there? That's brilliant. Thank you. And I sense as you're talking that this is really, outdoor play really is coming across for me anyway as a time for children and a time for, really child-led play. You talked about how, the child needs to choose the risk for themselves. And Susan, you talked about the children deciding what would happen to the creatures. So I just wondered how your feelings about how structured or unstructured play should be and the kind of role that teachers should play in children's play outdoors, given what you've said so far. Mariana, would you like to take this question again?
Sure, yeah. So we in our research, we generally look at unstructured play, and what we mean there is really the children having agency over what they do. Having said that, in some educational environments, so what we want to see is a model of play work, a play worker kind of model like you see coming out of the UK, where the adults help facilitate the children's play without controlling it. So for example, being able to help them figure out ways to, say, build a den or something like that, but the children are still making the decisions and advancing that play. In the case, there are pedagogical approaches that can really tap into play and use it to obtain pedagogical goals. So that's also possible. But certainly the kind of play that Susan and my research focuses on is very much the unstructured, child-led, internally motivated play.
And we have a very strong lead for that in our early childhood curriculum here in New Zealand too. So, okay, so what would be the features of successful outdoor environments that promote these kinds of play for children so that teachers can be in this facilitation role. Susan, what have you found to be really successful in terms of encouraging a range of learning opportunities?
Well, I think certainly, as I mentioned before, having play and natural elements integrated into the play experience. I think that's really key in a successful play environment. I think places where children can feel private, they can feel like they're alone. Children often don't have the opportunity in a childcare setting to be alone. They're heavily supervised. So even it can be, and I'll show some images to demonstrate this, but there's ways to make them feel like they're kind of on their own and not being supervised. And I can't stress more the ground playing, so the surface where kids are playing. We tend to be fearful of that and cover it with rubber or fake grass or something because we think it's safer, but it's really, that's where play is happening, is on the ground, and it's not to be afraid of, but it's a source of play. It's a source of where you can put plants. It's, you know, where kids will often fall onto the ground plane, sometimes purposely, and it really dictates the type of play that you can accommodate.
Okay, we've got some questions coming through on the chat function, and I'd just like to encourage teachers that are listening today to start typing in your questions. And I'll start with a question about attitudes towards risky play. So we've had a question come through already about how do we promote attitudes, positive attitudes towards risky play, and particularly with early childhood educators themselves. So persuading other teachers in your team, perhaps, that this is a good way to be working with children.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about this, and actually we're building a tool now for early childhood education teachers to be able to explore this for themselves and to share with their colleagues. And before I forget, you'll find that on outsideplay.ca. We have a parent tool on there. The early childhood educator tool will be there as of the end of August. But essentially what we have to understand is that educators will be at very different points, right? And some will be very comfortable with the kids being able to take risks, and that's no problem, and they like being outside and all that. And others just don't have these experiences and don't have a frame of reference, and perhaps there's a lot of fear and anxiety around, you know, the kids could get hurt or the parents could get mad or those sorts of things. And so I think the first important thing to understand is that there is that kind of range, and to be accepting of that. And so it's not about trying to pull people who are here over here. It's a journey. And so you have to start where people are at. But one thing that I find quite helpful is first of all, is actually to take people back to their early childhood experiences, much like we discussed at the beginning of this call, to try and get them to recall what it was about kind of their early play experiences that they really valued. And to think about how much of that experience the kids under their care are having. And if they're not, you know, how can they, you know, work along a journey to promote that. And the tool that we're building is a journey. It's meant to be a journey, but we really stress that it starts with one small, very manageable step. It could be something very, very simple. For example, counting to 17 next time they want to say be careful. You know, we all just want to get out with be careful, and be careful is actually quite a harmful thing to say for a variety of reasons. But you know, just as you want to step in, count to 17, letting it play out, you know, realizing that kids are more capable and competent than we often give them credit for. Starting that journey to build that relationship of trust, and shifting your role as an educator from one of policing to one of, you know, joy and finding meaning together.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to continue, if that's okay, Mariana, on this theme of risky play. What would be the best language then, someone's just asked, to use instead of be careful? Her example, the teacher on the chat has given the example of asking children to use their concentration and talking about that instead of talking about being careful. What would you recommend?
Well, so maybe I'll explain why be careful is so problematic.
Yes,
So
thank you.
if you think about kind of being on the receiving end of be careful, so what you're doing when you're saying be careful is you're trying to say, I am worried and scared. You know, you're conveying your own anxiety to the child, but you're not providing useful guidance, right? So what the child will hear, first of all, they're not understanding what you're worried about because it's not clear.
Mhm.
And what they hear is that you don't trust me to keep myself safe, right? So it can be quite harmful. So instead, you want to engage the child in that conversation. So as much as possible, you know, maybe I'm feeling a little unsettled in my stomach, you know, by what's going on. What do you think I'm thinking about? You know, so the idea being that, you know, if you're worried about, say, that they're going to climb a branch that can't take their weight or whatever, that you start them on the path to thinking about that. You know, what do you think? What's your next move? You know, what do you think about that branch that you're about to reach for? Or, you know, things like that, so that it's not you know, stop, you know, controlling the play or telling them why it's an issue, but rather using the opportunity to build their risk management skills.
Great. And also some questions about risky play for certain groups of children. Asking for ideas about risky play with toddlers, for example. Do you have any suggestions there, Mariana?
Yeah, so risky play, all of the 8 categories I talked about are relevant to toddlers. They'll just look different, right? So play where there's a chance of getting lost for teenagers, or, you know, or for kids that are older, will be, you know, wandering their neighborhood, you know, being able to go anywhere they want in the city by themselves. But for toddlers, it could be like, you know, Susan mentioned the importance of having hidey holes and places to be alone. So, you know, they're within the childcare center kind of play space. The teachers know exactly where they are, but they feel like they're off kind of in their own little place. So all of those types of risky play are legitimate, you know, at all ages.
Thank you. And what about in wet weather? We had a question as well about, I've got 2 questions here, I think, really coming through. What should we do when it rains? Should we be going out in the rain and dressing well for the weather? I mean, would you enforce wearing a particular type of clothing, for example, and just going out there in the rain? And if not, what are the other opportunities, I suppose, for risky play?
Do you want to take that?
To me or to, yeah, go out in the rain. We
Not
have
going to
these
melt.
things, you know, it's good for them to be out in the rain and splash in puddles and play in the mud. And I think we have these things called muddy buddies. I don't know if you have them in New Zealand, but they're kind of like one-piece suits that they're great because the kids can, I think if the kids have them on, then the parents feel better. They don't worry about their clothing as much. It protects their clothes, and the kids feel that they can get messy. And you want kids to get messy. And that's what's one of the great things about rain, is that you have lots of opportunities to do that. And do things like follow, you know, some plants that you floated down, some running water. It's going down the street and seeing where it goes. And so there's all kinds of natural systems that are put into play once you do go out and play in the rain. I have some great video clips of these kids that would take their buckets and put it under the play equipment, and the rain would come off the play equipment and they would collect it and then have these buckets of water. So I mean, water is just a great play prop.
Would you, in line with your ideas about children's agency outside, would you argue that children need to put these clothes on, or would you allow for children to make that decision for themselves, that they're starting to get cold or they're starting to get wet, or maybe just guide them in that direction? What would be your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I might explain that it would be, you know, they might feel more comfortable, but, you know, I think it's usually coming from the parents. I haven't really seen it come from the kids being upset if their clothes are muddy. But yeah,
Okay.
It's really a parental concern, I found.
Thank you. And I think that's another area that people are really interested in too. How do we promote this idea of being outside in all weathers, and taking risks and getting dirty in nature, with parents, and particularly because parents are paying for their child to be cared for, and mitigating that sort of perspective that perhaps because they've got wet or muddy, or they've taken some risks, that they're not being cared for as well. How do we manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, I mean, I've been doing this when I used to do a lot of playground design. I would start with the parents and ask them, what do they remember? And they remember playing in a forest, in a ditch, and they got muddy, and they have fond memories of that, of getting messy. And, so I think when you start from that playing field, that it just really helps them kind of see the value of it, and that it's not a bad thing, and that they have the right to essentially get messy, just because they remembered it, and sometimes it makes it more memorable. And I think that's a really important thing, is to build these positive memories in childhood.
I like that.
I think an important aspect too is that it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a one-off conversation, right? So it's important for parents to understand right from when they engage their child in that childcare center that this is the approach of the center. These are the reasons why. We value outdoor play. We value risk-taking in play. This is why it's important for the kids. The ECEs, the teachers can use pedagogical narration to also communicate with the parents, to show them, all of the wonderful things that their children have been doing and what they've learned from those. So it's this ongoing conversation. So when you have that ongoing conversation and it's clear to the parents why it's so important, and they see it over and over again, I've never seen any issues where, even the child getting injured and the parents getting upset about it. They understand why.
Yeah, that's so true. And in fact, we had some parents here that wanted to put like overhead awnings over the play equipment, so that when it rained, it wouldn't get wet, the equipment, and the kids wouldn't slip. And then we just had a conversation about that. When it rains, everything gets wet, and children learn that things get slippery. And so if they're given a play environment that never gets wet, that never gets slippery, then they don't know how to gauge themselves into, maybe playing on a slippery piece of equipment, or playing in a slippery environment, or being in an environment that's going to be slippery versus wet when it's dry. And they decided not to put the awning up. So I think that's so true.
And I really like that idea of having parents reflect on the kind of play that they did when they were children, and making that quite a personal decision actually from the parents, that they want their child to experience those kind of things, and becoming more open to what the Early Childhood Centre are trying to do. Thank you. I have some questions now around supporting children who are showing perhaps that they're not being challenged enough in an environment. So it always comes up with 4 and 5-year-old boys in early childhood centres, but also for children that maybe that are climbing everywhere but not actually climbing the climbing equipment that's provided so they're choosing to take some risks, I suppose. Who could answer that for us?
In terms of how to support it, or
how
how
to
to manage
children that I think there's probably that you both have a perspective here, because perhaps there are aspects within the environment that aren't meeting these children's needs, but also just how do you help children that aren't able to find challenges?
Maybe I'll take them. Yes, go ahead, Susan.
I had another question that I was going to answer about play equipment and materials to offer children. Are we going to still ask that one, or? Yeah,
go ahead, and we can do that one now.
Okay. Okay, because some of the answers are hitting upon that. But yeah, so I think that's one of the really important reasons why we should have risky play in our play environments, because Ellen Sensetter says, it's really not about age appropriateness. And I think that's so true. It's really about the personality of the child, because you have children that want to take risk. They want to just challenge everything. They'll climb the piece of top of a boring piece of play equipment. And then you have children that are very cautious. And it's really not so much about age, but really their psychology. And to try to understand that and come up with environments that will meet those very diverse personalities. And that's, I think, sort of the nature environment. I think of the kid Mariana, that when we did the intervention project, we put all this bamboo, and bamboo is so tough, you know, and he would just jump onto the bamboo and do these strange dances. And, you know, he was clearly, and he was a pretty angsty kid. Like he was a preschooler and just wanted to get everything he could out of the environment. You know, and other kids were kind of watching him and, you know, should we mimic him? And so they tried to do what he was doing. And so I think, you know, it's really important to consider the personality of the child you're working with.
I guess if I were to add to that, one of the important things, like we think about, we want diverse affordances in the play environment that the children can actualize. And one of the best ways to do that is to use loose parts, you know, that Susan already referred to, you know, water, mud, sand, sticks, stones, you know, tarps, crates, etc. The kinds of things that children can move around and allow their imagination to shape play. And having sufficient diversity of loose parts and numbers so that kids aren't forced to share, that they can really play the way they want to play, and that they can really just explore opportunities so that the kids like that who need more challenge can find it. And then the next aspect of that is of course the supervision that we provide. So rather than, as I mentioned, a policing kind of relationship, you know, in one of the studies that Susan and I did before we did the intervention, all you would hear was, you know, stop, you know, share, be careful, you know, and the ECE, the teachers really had to work hard to keep the kids entertained. A lot of crying, a lot of just, you know, kind of unhappiness. And then afterwards, there was such a variety of play opportunities that, you know, it shifted the environment. And the teachers talked about how they built a different kind of relationship with the kids. It was more based on trust. It was finding mutual joy and connection, you know, and so it was a whole different way of interacting with each other.
Thank you. And I think that's again something that we would like to spend a bit of time on, about creating environments that have those range of affordances. And so going back to you, Susan, and the design of outdoor learning spaces, and perhaps simple ideas that teachers can bring into their existing environment, because we don't all have the opportunity to overhaul our playgrounds. So that would be, I think that would be really great if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the original question was what equipment and materials. And, you know, really, when I did a study of 16 childcare centers, and we did a lot of videotaping, we did a random sampling of it, we found 87% of the time, the kids weren't on this very expensive play equipment. And they were doing other things in the environment. And I think a lot of it has to do because they're very safety oriented now, they're lower, not a lot of challenge. And also the kids in a daycare environment are going there every day. You know, it's their backyard every day. And so the thing has got to change the way nature does. And a piece of equipment stays the same. But I can go, I'm going to do my screen share now and go into a little presentation that I've got. Yeah, so this is a great example. Can everyone see that? Yep, okay. You know, nature being part of play. Kids are there playing with the sand and water. This is in a public park by the landscape architecture firm Space to Place. This is the intervention project. So these are play materials in the Risky Play Meets Nature Play project that Mariana and I did. And just these simple bricks, you know, start to become something as a mode of creation. And this boy went from being very unpopular to very popular because he could build these walls. Somehow, we don't know how, but he because of his ability to build these walls, so it actually changes his whole sort of social status within the classroom.
That's wonderful, and I can just, they were real heavy bricks, I imagine, and so the risk and that's a great example of something that teachers can
yeah, and this is supposed to show a looped play environment, but this one shows it as well. But I think too, you know, to always have paths and things that loop and go from one place. This is a really interesting childcare center because they've got a slide coming down from the roof, and so the kids can bike up the roof and then slide down the slide.
Wow.
I also think in terms of climbing, also I would always go for natural things like tree roots and rocks instead of standardized equipment. You know, when a child climbs a piece of standardized equipment, you know, they know it's been designed for them, so it's going to carry their weight. Everything is the same. The ladders are same spaced. They're predictable. You just kind of climb up. Or if you have something like a tree, you have to look at that branch and say, wow, is that going to hold me or not? Can I reach it? You know, maybe I can reach when I get older. And there's this unpredictability that's built into climbing in nature that you just don't get out of a piece of standardized equipment. Again, these are just two play environments by Space to Place at child care centers. The image on my right is an actual tree root that was just brought in from the woods, and rocks. You can often, if there's, anyway, I know there's a lot of farming in New Zealand. Farmers don't like rocks. You can often get them to donate rocks to your play environment. Again, a really interesting thing to climb. And then again, this is a great example. This is a child care center of plants integrated into play. This little boy balancing with plants. It was interesting too about this center was that I met one of the ECE, and she said it was the best place that she'd ever worked in. And she just loved being surrounded by flowers and plants.
Yes, so it's good for teacher well-being too.
It is, yeah, I think it's so important.
And that has an impact on children's experiences, so yeah.
Yeah, so here's an aerial view like you're flying over in an airplane. On one side, we have the play environment that Mariana and I are working with. And on the right-hand side, we have the plants. And we just kept the plants in the pots. And Sarah Brunel, who was a landscape architecture student, designed, you can see the circular spaces, these spaces that kids could occupy. And then when kids are running around, you can see with the undesigned space, the kid is just going back and forth. And they're against the fence. He's obviously very bored. So this is the movement of one boy over the same amount of time with the design, without the design, and then with the design. And you can see there's circular movements and their flows. It really changes the way that the children move around the play space significantly. You don't get these bored walking back and forth. You get places where kids pause. And here's kind of the center of one of those planting spaces. And I talked a little bit about how with plants you can create these subspaces. And so these kids think they're on their own. They're off in the jungle and they're making plans, obviously, but the ECE can still see them.
Mm.
And I got so excited when I started looking at the plants of New Zealand. It was like, wow, I'll live there and be a landscape architect, because it's just, you have so many plants that you can bring in, and they have wonderful culture and nature links. New Zealand is a plant that I used to use in playgrounds in California. It's great. You plant them for like toddlers. You can plant a whole bunch of them and they feel like they're in this sort of jungle, and they're native to New Zealand. The New Zealand windgrass, very inexpensive. It grows to about 3.5 feet, so it's about 1 meter. And because it grows seasonally, it can start out very small, the child side, because we talked about like how can nature make children curious. And then it grows, and by the end of the season, it's taller than the child. And so the child sees that and sees that change. And she sees how it changes the space, how it changes over time, and why it changes. And also, plants provide what's called play props, things that kids can play and make magic potions with. There's tons of Maori sort of connections with these plants as well. I was researching about the Nakau palms. And I know the palms that you used to use in California, and they make these great magic wands to play with once they fall. Apparently you can eat some parts of the berries and flowers of this palm that they were used in Maori culture. And of course the silver fern as well. And that's another plant that grows rapidly over time that has all kinds of connections culturally. And then again, the bamboo. They're very tough. They're great at creating dappled light if you have a very sunny condition. This is Moso bamboo that's native to New Zealand. The shoots are edible. They make great space, and children love to maintain these bamboo because you just kind of pull off the little leaves and you can start to make space, and they're very easy to pull off, and kids for some reason love to do that. And then you can start to keep this subspace once they grow tall. And I would keep them in the pots because
I was just going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, keep them in the pots, and it's easier that way too. I mean, I think that's what we did for the intervention project.
I felt then that it's that when you were talking about the map and how children were crossing the playground, you know, if you could just put some planters to break up your playground to make those different paths, that would again be quite a simple addition to a play space.
That's exactly what we did. They were just planters. So we didn't break ground anywhere in that intervention project.
Okay.
We had some sod in some areas, but it was really plants in pots. So yeah, it was great.
Well, thank you, Susan. We've got the chat box is going crazy with people asking each other if they, you know, where can I get some of these bricks? Has anybody got old bricks at home? So, and coming up with ideas like using wheelbarrows and things like that. So, yeah, so thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'd would take a minute or two here just to sort of sum up, and I'd just like to say thank you for the ideas that you've brought to us today. I love that idea at the beginning about mental curiosity, and I think that for me that would be something I would take away from this webinar about how could I create a bit more curiosity, mental curiosity in the play space that we have at an early childhood centre. What is one thing that you would really like to take for teachers to take away from this webinar this morning, from everything you've shared with us? Mariana, would you like to go first?
Sure. I guess the simplest message for me would be, you know, next time that you kind of feel your stuff catching in your throat, wanting to say something, just count to 17, you know, breathe, let it play out. You can get closer to the child, you know, if you feel comfortable, just breathe, count to 17, let it play out, and let that start you on your journey to start discovering what kids are capable of.
Thank you. Yeah, I think again that was very much appreciated in our comments from the chat box as an idea going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, feel like you are empowered to, you know, make changes to your play and work environment, and bring in those plants in pots. Try to create spaces. I think, you know, once you start to see some ideas and that you can actually start to affect change, you will see change. You'll see positive change. And, you know, I was very serious about the comment about the ECE really loving the work environment, which was a play environment that she was in, because we are in very stressful times now. And I think having a work environment that is filled with nature, that's beautiful, has mystery, is really, really important. And I think every intervention project and design projects I've worked on, the ECE have always commented how it improved their work environment, how going to work, you know, was a positive thing, how they enjoyed being in that space. And, you know, I think when the ECE are happy, that can make a huge difference in the play environment.
I agree, and thank you for the number of sort of simple ideas that you've given us to bring into environments. I just want to conclude as well by asking you where we could find some more resources on outdoor play. On our Education Hub website, we do have some resources on outdoor play for early childhood environments and on loose parts. So I encourage people listening to go and check those out. I wonder if perhaps someone was asking about the different kinds of risky play types, Mariana, so perhaps I could find a reference from you for that and put that up on our website. Would there be anything else you would recommend?
Yeah, sure. So the reference to risky play, there's a simple infographic on our website at outsideplay.ca, which is the tool for parents. And then I'd encourage people also to go to Outdoor Play Canada. On the resource page, there's a link, for example, to Susan's 7 C's guidelines for place-based design, and it's constantly being updated. So there's a whole bunch of resources there, including the link to outsideplay.ca, and, you know, helpful infographics that ECEs can give parents, and, you know, all sorts of things on there.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I get information from Jan White. I think Mariana probably does too, and she's in the UK. And she sends out these great newsletters with all kinds of very relevant, it's always kind of right what you need, information about the benefits of outdoor play and outdoor play ideas, which I think are very, very useful and imaginative.
Great, thank you. We'll add those to our resources for teachers. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful webinar. I feel really inspired and actually quite relaxed just even by the images you've shown us. I feel those positive feelings that nature affords us coming through the screen, which is really nice. So thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.